Hello and welcome to the Building Rapport podcast. Today I'm here with Mark Heaps, Chief Tech Evangelist and VP of Brand at Groq. Now, Mark, you've had a really impressive career spanning quite a lot of different roles or job titles: creative direction, brand development, tech evangelism. Can you sort of talk about how that diverse background has brought you uh, to this point within Groq where you're working to keep humanity in the soul of artificial intelligence, as you've kind of framed it previously?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for having me on. I think everything about the journey to this point is quite abstract and not traditional. Obviously, I work in a deeply technical role um, as a tech evangelist, but my education, I have a degree in fine art and a minor in theater, which I don't think most people would follow that path. Um, but we've seen with institutions like IDEO and Frog and others that design thinking has become centralized to many corporations and how they evolve their products. It's obviously core at Apple when you think about people like Johnny Ives and the influence that they had there. So in that same ilk, I've always straddled these two worlds where I came up as a graphic designer, eventually becoming creative director at a number of studios. And at the same time, I was a technologist that was passionate about the experience people had with software, with hardware experiences. And that's sort of the work that I did at Google and other places. And they've just merged and converged over to this point where I met Groq and was lucky enough to find a company that had a CEO who cared deeply about brand, a slightly abstracted version of brand, perhaps, but cared very much about this level of design thinking going into everything. And he was very driven by that. And so we aligned very quickly. But yeah, I've done everything from writing books on digital color systems and production and design, all the way through to papers about why fonts matter, and then also designed physical hardware that stands up in data centers. So it's been a fun ride so far.
That is a real mix, kind of a true journey to get there. Could you maybe highlight some kind of standout, I don't know, points in your career, points in your education that have allowed you to get this role within such a cutting edge AI hardware company?
Yeah, I mean, there's always fun projects, right? I've designed restaurants, and people say, well, how does that play a part in being in the tech world? I love working on restaurants. I think I've designed maybe 9 restaurants completely now, not just
Whoa.
their brand, but literally when they bought the building and said, hey, it's a clean slate. How do people walk in? You're thinking about the experiences of human beings. When I worked at Google on the book scanning project, the the task that was put to me was to be this conduit between the engineers developing the software for scanning the books and the moderators and the operators that were actually scanning the books and then checking them for content. And we would make decisions about, hey, should this button in the interface be here on the right? I could shave 3 seconds per click at 2 million clicks per operator per shift if I just moved it over here. And so everything really comes down to what is the experience of the human being, right? And then how do you maximize that potential? And so you could come at it as a very commercialized mindset of like, how do you sell more if you're trying to design for product? But I think the symptom of increasing sales or anything is start with the human being first. And one of the biggest amplifiers of that in my career was when I was really blessed and fortunate enough to end up working at Duarte. Duarte is famous as a communications presentation design agency. Nancy Duarte is a maven in, around the world on communication storytelling. But what they really hold true as a belief is story is everything. And when I started there, it was really funny. I went there, and within 90 days, I thought, oh, I'm absolutely going to get fired. There's no way I'm going to survive here because I'm so deep in the how we get things done, the technical craft and skill, that I'm not coming up to this level above the level I've ever seen of putting story first. And it really is story first there. And so when you consider that, you start realizing I have to talk about impact. I have to try to resonate with an audience. I have to think about how people will feel about this first. and then you engineer the solution. And I saw that be radically successful again and again at that agency. But where Duarte was good at the story, nobody there was actually working on, you know, building systems or doing things that were uh, more traditional, or the semiconductor or the SaaS industries. And so suddenly found myself in this sweet spot between all of those worlds, which led to this sort of evangelism.
Yeah, it's just crazy kind of how kind of the breadth of your career and also how deep you've managed to go within, designing 9 restaurants. I'm not sure there's many people out there who can say they've done that, but I've seen what, good design thinking can do just at
Yeah,
simple places near me. The removal and addition of one table, suddenly it changes the feeling of a place.
absolutely.
Your role's obviously within brands, but you've taken, probably not what I would describe as a typical journey, and you're talking quite sort of technical terms. Could you maybe explain how you do brand and how Groq does brand differently to what most people might think about it?
Yeah, sure. So I think at most corporations or institutions, you think of brand as part of a design group, creative group, who's setting the brand system, the fonts, the colors, what does our logo mark, what does our templates and systems look like, et cetera. I was really lucky when I met Jonathan Ross, and I think at that point, Groq was roughly 4 years old. And he told me, I'm so lucky for this. He told me that his roommate at one point was, I think, a senior art director from a very famous design agency called Pentagram, which I believe is based here in Austin, Texas. And he said that roommate really drove into him why design thinking and brand mattered so much. And then you famously hear about, leaders like Jeff Bezos who are quoted as saying, brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. I've actually adapted that quote for Groq, and I say brand is how people feel about you when you're not present.
Wow.
Um, and that's very much the ethos of my team, is how will this make people feel. So Jonathan early on said, hey, I want to make it aware to everybody in this institution that brand will touch everything here. They are one of the most cross-functional groups, and there are no silos. So because of that, when we were standing up our first nodes, right, our servers, it was really interesting. Someone showed me the first design, and the logo was massive on the front, and they'd done quite a good job as a design if you thought of it as a singularity. And I just asked the simple question, hey, has anyone thought about what this would look like if you had 50 of these in a row, and what it would feel like to a data center admin walking down that row? And they just looked at me like I was crazy. And so I photoshopped and mocked up a data center room, and I said, this is what it looked like. And suddenly it was worse than Times Square in New York. You had all these logos for Groq massively screaming at you as you're walking through the data center. And I asked the question, I said, does this look like a company that's confident in themselves? Or does it look like they're desperately trying to make you see their name? And Jonathan simply said, this is why you have to touch everything.
Yeah.
Right. So brand is very much fused and aligned as a support mechanism for product development, all the way through to the demos that we develop for him when he's on stage, and what our customers and users get to see. And at the same time, we're not the expert in any of those things, right? We're not the UI expert group. We actually have some of those members in our cloud team, and they're amazing and brilliant. But that brand level of thinking touches everything that we do. And so I think this is where I get back to my core mission, which is keeping the soul of humanity in AI. I care deeply about how will this make people feel. And so I've seen some demos that blew us away from a technical capability. And then when I looked at them, went, this is going to terrify people. If you present it like this is going to further fuel the fire of AI is going to, destroy humanity. And so I think a lot of it is having that sensibility around things. And that's really what the brand group does. So we have content members of our team that are writers. We've got folks that are unbelievable communicators, former Duarte members that work with me on my team. And then, I think compared to the other semiconductor companies, we're much less traditional. We have a lot of videos, we have a lot of rich new media. All of that is just trying to drive a human experience.
Yeah, that's very true. It's interesting how I feel a connection to your brand, not as some data sheet and, oh, this is spec is better than that spec. It's almost, you drive yourself into this whole other category with your brand where
Right.
you're like, this is who Groq is, and we are doing our own thing over here on the back of great silicon design. But
Exactly.
we're not competing with other people. You go and have a war between yourselves if
Yeah, that's right.
that
That's right.
that's what you want to do. You're obviously a great communicator, but you've mentioned several times online, so I did some background reading, like the challenge of balancing the technical information. Maybe that
Yeah.
especially with engaging content. Like AI is a hard enough topic to understand, and then you've got hardware on top of that. I guess that's got hard in its name. Like, how do you make that accessible? How do you make that exciting to a broad audience that um, will want to come in and engage with what Groq lets them do rather than the technology side of it?
Yeah, this was probably my greatest challenge when I joined Groq. I was surrounded by brilliant people. I think the majority of our company had PhDs at that time. And they would, I would ask them why this technology matters. And they'd walk me through their papers that they've received awards for. They'd walk me through the tables, the charts, this is how electricity flows across the silicon. But what you realize is that's what matters to them because that's the lens they see the world through, right? I look at the world through a brand lens and I see it in a different way that, people are closest to what they touch the most. And so it was really hard to get them to understand that people weren't going to appreciate this amazing technology they'd created until they could feel it. And even more so, the challenge of you've got the 800-pound gorilla in the room that is the incumbents. And, very much an industry standard is if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah.
And so we saw the technology and went, why are people raving about Chat GPT at that time running on traditional GPU systems when they're getting 40 tokens per second? That's going to lead to a problem. So, the way that you get people to care about something is to actually have them experience it firsthand. And my favorite analogy of this, I've been riding motorcycles since I was about 5 years old. And which you could question my
Yeah.
parents for
I
that
was going
one.
to say parents and legality, but we'll
Yeah, it
move
was a
past
different
that.
it was a different time in the 80s, right?
Okay.
But I can tell you all about the engineering of what it's like to ride a motorcycle at 150 miles an hour. I can tell you about speed, I can tell you about balance, center, all of the technical side, torque, all of it. You'll feel nothing about that.
Yeah.
If I put you on a bike and you ride at 150 miles an hour, you will feel and describe it in completely radical different ways, right? And I try to get people to understand that first. So even 3 years ago, I told Jonathan, you can see this video actually, our very first Groq Day videos. I say this, we had one demo. And I created that first Groq Day event as a forcing function to have engineers make demos that were experiential, because up until that point, we had charts and tables. When I created an event, I said, well, I can't go to this event and just show people charts and numbers. Let's show them it running. Suddenly, they got behind that idea, and we did our first GPT demo. A great engineer named Peter there that helped me build that. And he was one of the early adopters of this philosophy. Since then, that has become a huge ingredient in why Groq has had this rise. And we were very lucky that Chat GPT had an explosion. I think that really put gasoline on the fire we were trying to start. So, we just were lucky when it came to that. But I always had this belief that if we built the demos and the experiences, people would backwards engineer to the why it felt great versus trying to sell the why first.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think my background's been a lot in facial animation, and
Yeah,
you're talking in milliseconds, and
absolutely.
it's just not comprehensible to go, oh, that audio is 50 milliseconds too late, too slow, too whatever. And then you see it, and as a human, you feel it, you can just tell someone it's wrong. And that's not because you're a trained facial animator or you've got great
Right.
experience. You feel it within you, and you know that feeling of, hey, this is incredible, that looks right, it works. And I certainly have a similar experience utilizing kind of some of the tools on Groq compared to the other ones. The other ones are great, and then you use Groq and you're like, hang on a second,
Yeah.
this is a step change. Like, ah, you start going, what else can be done? And it's very powerful.
Well, that's another one of those great experiences in my career. I don't even know if I have this online, but I actually worked at an animation house in my early 20s
Okay.
that was originally called FM Media, became Spotbox Media, eventually got bought by another company. But I remember someone showing up at our office to tell us about a new software called Flash that wasn't really called Flash then, it was a different name. But I made cartoons for, 2 years,
Mhm.
and everything from cell-based animation drawing all the way up to digital. And you think about those expressions. Now, fast forward today, I've got two kids, both teenagers, and I watch how they work. And I tell everybody, if you want to really get into this mindset, watch kids, because they're your next generation of customer and they'll tell you everything you need to know. If you disregard a kid's opinion about a technology, you will fail. That has classically been true in my experience. So when I watch my kids Google something, they think Google is stupid. Like they think the company's great, right? They've got friends through me that work at Google, but they're like, oh my God, now I have to sift through all these links and then I got to click one and then I got to find the information I'm looking for. They're like, this is dumb. Whereas me growing up with actual encyclopedias, I'm like, this was the greatest thing ever. They think it's dumb as an experience. The knowledge is great, but it's a dumb experience. And then I watched them trying to use Alexa. We have them all over our house. And the language interface experience is so slow and not fluid. They don't feel like they can have an iterative conversation through that device. So for them, speed and low latency matters. And when I showed them, I think I actually showed them the Rapport demo with the 3D avatar, and they were like, see, this is cool. I could have, my daughter said this really acutely. She said, this could be like a tutor that never gets frustrated with me. And that's
Yeah.
what she got excited about. And so, yeah, I think we just need to look forward and lean into those experiences that they want.
No, I think that's totally it. I think I look at kind of some of the traditional experiences and they're call and response. They're not
Yeah,
that ongoing conversation. And suddenly that's where speed really matters because
that's right.
do that interrupting and you have those non-verbal cues as well, which is one of the things I'm so passionate about with rapport is actually looking something in the eye and you just know when to start speaking and stop speaking.
Right, right.
Uh, Going back a bit to kind of brand, clearly you came in right at the start of Groq and built that brand from zero to what it is today.
Yeah.
With AI and the AI tools, like what do you see as those challenges in building that brand identity with generative AI, and what tools do you wish that exist today kind of existed at the start of your journey in Groq?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because my answer would change every week.
Fair enough.
The landscape of AI is ever changing, and I always tell my team, if you've had a really good workout and you sit down, if you sit too long, you cramp up.
Yeah.
I always tell them, I'm like, don't sit too long, because we've got to be ready to play at any minute, just like we did, this week with some events and other activities that are going on. I, you know, we we wished early on there had been more systems that could have supported our ideas. Vercel has obviously been instrumental with what they've done with some of their frameworks and toolkits, but we had ideas that we couldn't execute on because they were terribly difficult when you didn't have access to those resources. Now, the last 6 months have been amazing for my team. We had two interns. One of them is a student going to Stanford now. He just started last week. Another one is going into University of Michigan, I believe. And they came in, and I literally went into meetings with them on a whiteboard and said, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking. This would be a great demo. Let's think of a chain of thought demo, or let's do an agentic workflow." I would draw that on a board, and they'd come back to me in an hour and a half later and have a working prototype. 2 years ago, that would have required me begging for 5 engineers to work on something for 2 months. And so the rate of change now and what we're able to execute on is fantastic. So, if I could turn back time, I wish some of those resources would have been available back then, because we had the ideas, but they were ahead of the tooling. And I suppose that's quite normative throughout history.
Yeah.
Um, the other challenge in this space is there's a lot of noise. There's a there's
listeners.
so much noise in the AI space. One of my team members and I joke about when HD became the big thing, coming out of the 90s into the 2000s. And you knew it had jumped the shark when you could walk into a hardware store and see a can of paint and it says, this paint now in HD. And you're like, that's not how that works. But they're just using the buzzwords, right? Now you've got a new challenge of not convince people that you've got a great technology or a great demo, but how do you get that to rise above all of the noise? And so, in fact, there's a demo that a developer sent me just a few days ago. I tweeted out about it. Um, it's basically a chat demo. It's a voice demo. It's at its core, it's not unique. The experience that he created in that design, where it's iterative and the things you see happening while you talk to it audibly as a language interface, is next level. And so, to me, I just think that's the challenge now.
Totally, that's something we're really experiencing with Rapport. Is like we get so many great customers coming to us with these incredible ideas,
Yeah,
and they're sometimes just slightly out of reach or
yeah,
just slightly out of this customer's capabilities. And because these new technologies, you're being pulled in 100 different directions with
totally.
100 different industries wanting this capability, capacity, but they've each got their own nuance, subtlety, whatever that is, and it's framing the product to match each industry can be a real challenge.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talk about, one of our senior engineers promoted this idea to me, and I think it's become pivotal for us, is reduce the imagination gap. So one of the reasons that we now have a showcase page on our website where you can see apps that people built in our console where the developers really work, there's even more. But what we've noticed is every time we promote and advocate for other developers' work, it inspires the further developer community to see how they build on it. And that's why you see this rapid state of change. The nature of the AI community is to be open source and completely transparent. And they just put projects out there even when they fail. Conceptually, it reduces this imagination gap and everybody's building on top of one another. And I think this is the spirit of what you see on GitHub. It's what you see in these communal presences. It's what you see at meetups and hackathons. Everybody's not there to compete, but like advance.
Yeah.
And so for us, if we can be an amplifier to that signal, that helps, right? But for the first 3 years at Groq, that was a challenge because I didn't have the first thing to then start the building on top of and then invite the community to contribute to. Now we're in a completely different space.
Yeah, no, I definitely think we're seeing a similar thing, but I think maybe we're a year or two behind you, where we've got a few of these early use cases that are starting to be out in the market and have people say, "Oh, I like that, but can you make it like this for mine?" Talking about kind of what Rapport does and what Grok does,
Yeah.
like, and your background in creative direction, like, where do you see the unique user experiences coming in that combination between avatars and artificial intelligence?
One of the reasons that the first time I heard about Rapport, and I think I spoke to your founder, uh, I was so excited about it. And because I've been saying for years, even before I was at Groq, in fact, one of the side projects I had at Google is I worked on Google Voice. And I've always said that we're advancing technologically towards a world where digital assistants will be prevalent. There'll be this ubiquity of AI that allows every person to walk into their home, walk into their car, be anywhere, and have an R2D2 or a Jarvis level support, right? But interfacing with a voice in the ether, although functional, robs you of a certain range of interactivity and expression that utilizes a lot of what makes human beings great, right? And so I think about a digital educator, right? Like I was a professor for 7 years. When I think about my kids, I remember one of my kids saying they didn't like a class and they were quite young at that point. I think they might have been first grade. And I said, "Why don't you like the class?" And they said, "Well, the teacher's scary." And it kind of hit me, and I was like, why? And it was totally based on the gesture, mannerism, expression of that teacher. And I
Mhm.
thought, gosh, if you think about a digital avatar, we could make this. Imagine that your kid's being taught by a puppy. Why can't they be taught by a puppy? Right? They can. And we've seen this with like education software for decades where they've used avatars that were pre-recorded and, all these things. But it makes it more approachable for the right type of user. So, what was our challenge in not having that before? Well, you didn't have this level of compute, you didn't have this level of low latency. So now you can take these concepts of an avatar based interface and it could be contextually adaptive using a computer vision model. The moment you walk in, imagine a kiosk and it goes, oh, that's a kid. This is my most popular avatar for a kid. And it talks to the kid. Or you walk in and say, hey, I'm a senior citizen. And it goes, okay, I shouldn't look like, I'm sure most senior citizens walking in wouldn't want to see a 6'3" heavily tattooed guy like me serving them at a counter. But now it can be contextually relevant to make people feel at ease. And I think once you get those barriers out of the way, they're more likely to engage in a more rich experience.
I think that's lovely. I think we're seeing lots of the users of Rapport do exactly what you're talking about, where
Yeah.
sometimes it's actually almost the inverse, where they're training people to be able to match themselves contextually, so they're getting an opportunity to speak with a range of different characters, individuals that maybe they would only have a limited opportunity to speak to in their career, but it really matters when they do, and
Yeah.
actually get to practice those moments, those contexts, those scenarios, just as you said, over and over and over again until they
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable in that scenario. And then, you know, that's putting that humanity back in AI, which is one of the reasons I wanted to get you on this podcast so much. Is I just think so many of our users are seeing this AI and going, "Hey, I want to put a face to it. I want to bring something to life here, so people can go and be more human and more interactive without having to go and have awkward conversations, and they can just
Yeah.
move past that and get started."
Yeah,
Do you
absolutely.
you mentioned being a professor for kind of 9 years? Obviously, there's been some negative side of people using AI to cheat to game the system.
Yeah.
But there's been positive ideas and positive things coming through, like Rapport. Like, how how do you see this kind of evolving education, and particularly in the creative industries, like AI fitting in with this kind of whole sphere and space?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I say to my kids as a parent, whenever they're struggling with why do you use something, I say, what's the tax? Right? What's the tax of having that thing? Everything has a tax. Every engagement, relationship, interaction, or decision you make has a tax. Whether you're exerting energy or paying economically, there's a tax. And I think about this constantly. When my kids were little, we gave them tablets, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you can't do that! It's going to ruin their brains. They're going to become junkies to the screens." And I said, "Well, I didn't say I wasn't moderating it, but I am giving them access to the technology." And we live in Texas, and we got a lot of other parents that thought we were doing a terrible thing, and maybe we were. This whole life is an experiment, right? But today I have two kids that are straight A students that don't fear technology, believe that if they break anything, it could be fixed easily. And, software is not a physical thing. They're not going to hurt anything. And so I think about this when you scale up to education or even to industry. I think throughout history, technology has always unlocked new potential while at the same time created new problems. So the problem isn't like, is AI used for cheating and therefore we turn it off? The question is how do you solve the cheating problem with not allowing the first default option to be no AI? We have to figure out where that space is that you adapt technology and and then come back and say, what are the problems that it created? Um, there's a lot of good examples of this throughout history, all the way up to nuclear energy, um, and down. But I get very frustrated with the default. I actually still advise on a lot of education groups that work with school boards, and one of the things I get very frustrated about is this is dangerous, turn it off. And really, you have to say, well, what's the potential here? So hopefully nobody in the school district sees this one, but we found out recently that a number of high schoolers here in the region I live in found out about Groq. Well, their schools had blocked, everyone in the region blocked OpenAI. So these students had no access to this technology, but they found out they could still get access to Groq. So all these students are using it. And I asked some of them, hey, do you feel like you're cheating? And they said, no, I feel like I'm finding the information that I need, and I'm ingesting the information I need, and I'm putting it into this thing that they want me to put it into in a project. They don't understand how that's different than going and reading a white paper or reading a book and moving that information from there to, point A to point B. It's just a way to ingest information. The reason I can justify this at maybe a behavior science level is that throughout history, we've advanced through greater access to information and knowledge. And
Definitely.
so through repetitive access to information, you get smarter. Now, maybe we could argue that people don't retain as much, right? Because they know I don't need to retain this because I have access to this thing. It's sort of the old thing when I went to school in England, my teacher saying, you need to learn this math because you won't have a calculator with you at all times.
Well, that makes me angry now looking back at it. I had that as well in school.
Yeah, but today we all carry a computer in our pocket, right? Now, should I fundamentally understand how numerics work? Absolutely, because I still need to be able to think about the problem. But if I can accelerate through my understanding how I interact with the device and get it to help me find the answer, that's where I really lean into being a tech evangelist and a technologist, because it's about the relationship you have with technology. Luke Skywalker didn't know everything in Star Wars. That's why he had R2D2 and C3PO, right?
Yeah,
It's assistance everywhere. This is why I keep saying it's an ubiquity of digital assistance.
yeah, totally. I love that attitude and that, progressive kind of nature of it, because I totally agree with you. I think about how I've been successful in my career, and it's not been that retention of information. It's knowing
Right.
where to get it and knowing how to apply it, rather than
That's right.
whether that's asking someone, asking an assistant, doing it. It's all about the speed. So I love your positivity and good spin there, and totally agree. Looking
Yeah.
ahead to rather just the education piece and battling with kind of people's preconceived turn it off notions,
Yeah.
what excites you most about that intersection of AI, creativity, avatars? Like, are there any emerging trends, technologies that you're like, yeah, this is the thing I want to see really invested in and worked on?
It's there's so much that excites me, and thankfully I'm in a front row seat, right? I'm courtside where I get to see some of the development and the things that are happening. Um, but for example, going back to the idea that there's a tax for everything, I have a multi-decade career as a professional creative. I'm deep in the Adobe community. When I came out and started promoting AI usage within the design community, I can tell you there were people that literally sent me hate mail. There were people that told me I was ruining their life by, bringing this technology forward. And I wrestled with that because I'm passionate about creatives and what they bring to the world. But here's where I look at the tax. If you tell me, hey, evolving an AI technology that can do really advanced image recognition and generation, et cetera, and this is going to really hurt this group conceptually. And at the same time, the foundation of that exact same technology can detect cancer cells through medical screenings using a vision model and an image generation model where it can label things in real time. And that can save millions of lives. How can you not be excited about that? How can you not wake up every morning and say, yeah, that's a thing I want to enable? And what we've always seen is even though there's fear from new tooling, historically, generations come up and just figure out how to be more creative with that tool. So I look back to when I started as a photographer, as a teen working on our school paper. I didn't have autofocus on cameras. It was a manual focus camera. And suddenly when you got autofocus, I remember the older photographers telling me, well, that's cheating, right? Today you can buy a DSLR from Sony or Nikon or Canon. And not only does it autofocus, but it'll auto detect a smile on a person using a trained AI model and auto take the picture when they smile. So you don't quite miss that moment. Well, now we're looking at gen models where you're taking a photo, and if they blinked and you got the eyes closed, it'll just put their eyes back in based on the picture you took previously. To me, this is just a whole other world of unlocking our potential and having this human plus kind of experience through the technology, right? And removing that barrier of entry that used to require craftsmanship, although I deeply, deeply honor and respect someone learning a craft, right? I play a bunch of musical instruments. I've studied my crafts in design and I went to school and did actual hand paintings. Um, I met someone recently who was completely paralyzed from the neck down, who was passionate about music. And now you see there's an AI tool out there where you can just hum and sing into this AI, and it will write the song that it thinks you're trying to articulate. And then you can iterate and say, no, 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 saxophone, no, 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 more of a break beat. Hey, can we change that ride to have a sizzle? Think about what has going to happen to society with people that just couldn't be involved in certain realms and now will be able to. In my mind, and obviously this is selfish to me personally, but I don't think there's any tax that I wouldn't pay to see us advance in that way. And so
No,
to me, uh, it's just a great time to be involved in technology.
I totally. I think I'm involved in technology for the same reason. I think, and creative technology specifically for me, being in animation and creative tools is with all of these things coming out, it's removing that need for that $5,000 license, which 10 years ago was
Right?
a $50,000 license,
That's
which
right.
it's now about creativity being the most valuable thing and who's got the best idea,
Yeah.
not who can pay the most money and buy the most expensive lathe, computer,
Yeah.
etc. It's like, hey, I've got this incredible creative idea and I've got now all these tools that can just make it come to life so much faster and so much quicker. And just as a
That was
society,
yeah, that was the inspiration, as Jonathan described it, of why he left Google and started Grok. I asked him before I joined because I was a vendor first, and he said, I just don't want to see a world where there is the haves and the have-nots with the potential of this technology. And I asked him to describe that to me, and he was very succinct. Right at that time, there was about 5 or 6 institutions in the world: Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft, the US government, the Chinese government, et cetera. He says, where they have all this technology. But if you want to provision compute to explore your idea, you better come to the table with somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million to have access to this level of compute inference. And you have to provision that at the cloud. He said, I'm going to create a world where anybody with a credit card down to the penny could have access to this level of compute so that someone who's a researcher or an innovator can actually exercise their idea. And what if that changes the world? And he formed Grok.
that's amazing. I think, Mark, thank you so much for your time. I think that's a brilliant note for us to leave it on.
Sure.
If people want to find out more about yourself or Grok, where could they find you?
They can go to grok.com and check everything out on the website. There's free demos there. If they're a developer, there's free API access to our cloud there. That's something that we're also committed to. For me personally, I'm kind of all over the web, but certainly I'm on most of the social media, Twitter, which I guess I'm supposed to call X these days. But my handle there is Life by Pixels, and yeah, I'm at events and I'm all over the place. So yeah, just look me up, and I'm happy to engage.
Brilliant. And look, if you want to try Grok with an avatar yourself, go to rapport.cloud. It's there on the kind of free to use tier, and you can see the kind of incredible speed and performance that you can get out of the platform and start building things. So, Mark, thank you so much for your time. This has been the Building Rapport podcast. See you next time.